The Whispering Dolls. It began the day Emily and her family moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town. The house had stood empty for years, its once vibrant exterior dulled by time and neglect. Despite its dilapidated appearance, Emily's parents had fallen in love with its character, calling it a fixer-upper, a project they could turn into their dream home. But to Emily, it just looked like the kind of place that gave people nightmares. From the moment they walked through the front door, there was an undeniable sense of unease. The air inside felt heavy, like it hadn't been stirred in decades, and the house creaked and groaned as if it were alive. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them, silently judging their presence. The strangest part, however, was the attic. It was sealed shut, the door locked with a rusted old padlock that no one could find the key for. Emily's father had promised to break it open eventually, but for now, it was a mystery. One Emily wasn't particularly eager to solve. But everything changed the night she first heard the dolls. Emily had never been afraid of dolls. As a little girl, she had collected them, lining them up on her shelves, each one with its own name and personality. But when she grew older, she found them creepy, their frozen faces and lifeless eyes unsettling. She'd packed them away in boxes, stashing them in the attic of their old home before the move. One evening, as the family unpacked, Emily's father finally got around to breaking the padlock on the attic door. Dust billowed into the air as the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into the darkness. "Let's see what we've got," her father said, grabbing a flashlight and disappearing into the attic. Emily waited at the bottom of the stairs, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. After a few minutes, her father reappeared, holding a small box. "Look what I found," he said, placing the box in front of Emily. It was an old wooden box, its surface scratched and worn. The lid creaked as Emily opened it, revealing its contents: dolls. Dozens of them. "These must have belonged to the previous owners," her father said. "Who?" Emily stared down at the dolls, a chill running down her spine. They were old, very old. Their faces were cracked and faded, their glass eyes staring up at her in a way that made her skin crawl. There was something wrong about them, something deeply unsettling. She didn't want to touch them, but she felt drawn to them, like they were waiting for her. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily couldn't shake the image of the dolls from her mind. She imagined their lifeless eyes watching her, their tiny mouths whispering things she couldn't hear. She tossed and turned, trying to push the thought away, but the unease clung to her like a shadow. And then she heard it, a whisper. It was faint, barely more than a breath, but it was there, a soft, eerie voice drifting through the darkness. Emily sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She held her breath, straining to listen, but the whisper was gone. She told herself it was her imagination, that she was just spooked by the dolls, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. The whispers returned the next night. This time they were louder, more distinct. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, threatening. Emily lay frozen in her bed, her eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. The whispers seemed to surround her, coming from every direction, as if the very walls were speaking to her. And then she realized where they were coming from. The dolls. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the whispers, too terrified to move. When morning finally came, she was pale and exhausted, her mind racing with fear. She told herself it was all in her head, that there was no way the dolls were whispering to her. But the whispers felt so real, so vivid, that she couldn't dismiss them. She decided to tell her mother. "They're just old dolls, Emily," her mother said, her tone dismissive. "You're letting your imagination get the better of you. We've been under a lot of stress with the move." Emily didn't argue. There was no point. Her mother wouldn't believe her, and neither would her father. She was on her own. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more persistent than before. This time, Emily could almost make out the words. They were faint, distorted, like they were coming from underwater, but the tone was clear. The voices were angry, malicious. They hissed and muttered, their words filled with a sense of menace that made Emily's skin crawl. And then, one word stood out, clear as day. "Leave." Emily bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked around her room, but there was nothing there, just the darkness and the dolls, sitting quietly in their box in the corner. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, filling her head with a cacophony of voices. And then she saw it. One of the dolls was standing at the foot of her bed. It was a small, porcelain doll with a cracked face and a faded dress. Its glass eyes gleamed in the darkness, and its mouth was open, moving in time with the whispers. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the doll slowly turned its head to look at her, its eyes locking onto hers. And then it whispered again, "Leave!" Emily screamed. Her parents rushed into her room, finding her huddled in the corner, her face pale and her body trembling. The dolls were still in their box, untouched, but Emily knew what she had seen. She knew the doll had moved. It had whispered to her, but her parents didn't believe her. "It's just a nightmare," her father said, rubbing his eyes. "You're overtired. Let's put the dolls back in the attic. That should help." Emily didn't argue. She was too shaken to protest. Her father gathered up the dolls and took them back to the attic, locking the door behind him. But Emily knew it wouldn't make a difference. The dolls weren't just objects. They were something else, something alive. That night, Emily lay in bed, listening to the silence, waiting for the whispers to return. But this time, there was nothing. No voices, no hissing, no threats. Just silence. For the first time in days, she slept. But her relief was short-lived. The next morning, when Emily woke, the attic door was open. She stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest. The door was ajar, the lock broken, and the dolls were gone. She searched the house, frantically looking for them, but they had disappeared. That night, the whispers returned. They were louder now, more aggressive. The voices screamed in her ears, filling her mind with threats and warnings. They told her to leave, to get out of the house, or else. And then she saw them. The dolls. They were standing in a circle around her bed, their lifeless eyes staring up at her, their tiny mouths moving in unison. The whispers poured from their mouths, a chorus of voices that grew louder and louder until Emily thought she would go mad. And then they stopped. The room was silent. The dolls were still, their glass eyes gleaming in the moonlight. And then, one by one, they began to move. They shuffled forward, their tiny feet scraping against the floor, their eyes never leaving Emily. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The dolls climbed on her bed, their cold, porcelain hands reaching out for her. Emily thrashed and kicked, but it was no use. The dolls were relentless, their whispers filling her mind, drowning out her thoughts. And then everything went black. When Emily woke, she was lying in the attic. The dolls were gone, but the whispers remained. They echoed in her head, taunting her, reminding her of their presence. She was trapped in the house, unable to leave, unable to escape the whispers. The dolls had taken her. Now, every night, she hears their voices whispering to her, telling her secrets and threats. They speak of the past, of the people who had lived in the house before her, of the terrible things that had happened to them. And she knows that she is next, because the dolls are never satisfied. They will whisper and whisper until they have taken everything from her, her mind, her body, her soul. And then they will find someone new, someone to whisper to. To this day, the house remains abandoned. No one dares to enter, for fear of the whispers that echo through the walls, the voices of the dolls that haunt the attic. Some say that if you listen closely, you can hear them, tiny, porcelain voices whispering secrets in the dead of night. But no one stays long enough to find out.